Hi, everyone. So we finish our week with talking about international organizations and some American organizations, in particular economic organizations that work for our benefit, or at least try to do so. And for us as users, they provide a lot of information. So understanding where to get economic information and data is extremely important for business and any type of job, actually. Information is the key, and getting information from first original source. So one of the things that is different from maybe how you work in university compared to when you're actually responsible for whatever you say, unlike things you can see on TV, that they're not responsible. So you gotta be careful. Unfortunately, the first thing we are exposed, the first kind of connection with economics goes through TV news, which is not great because because of freedom of speech, they're not responsible for what they say. They can lie, they can make up data, they can do all of those things. And it's kind of a problem, but on the other hand, we do want freedom of speech. So it's kind of byproduct of a good thing. So we won't go there. So when you enter business world, you have to be extremely careful with where you get your data. And there are only few sources that you can actually get your data that are reliable about, let's say, market data. The analysis that you were making on a micro level, Wall Street Journal is kind of fine, but actually won't really work. You will have to double check that with the original source. So for the corporate data, there is only one original source. That's the corporation itself. You go to its web page, they're transparent. Public corporations, they public there. That is the original source. That is the only correct data. Now, Wall Street Journal has a reputation of being responsible. However, again, if they make mistake, they're not liable for that. So you cannot sue them. So something might be wrong. If you subscribe to some paid services like Bloomberg or S&P, some others, they're still not liable. However, they cannot misinterpret intentionally, so there are some liabilities. But in what we can get for free is those international organizations and national statistics. So when we use economic data, mostly for businesses, data like we used in your first and second presentations, but also a little more aggregated like industry data, or just some data or some ideas or data to support some business ideas. A lot of that is a bit on macro. So macro and micro meeting on an industry data level, and that's where most things that we can get are. So let's say you want to start a company to produce solar panels, and you think, well, oil prices are high, maybe it's a great time to start a business, you don't see much competition, you want to look into that. Okay, where do you start? Well, you need to learn about the industry itself, and in particular in your location, but in general, who makes those solar panels. Do you want to make your own? Do you want to get something, be just sort of resell them basically and install them, and so on. So all of that, depending on the industry, but for the most new projects, you can find in those organizations that we are talking today. And there are not many of them. There are only basically three really powerful international organizations And then for every country, there is a central bank and the government statistics. So 2 for every country and 3 international. There are some regional, as we call them. For example, NAFTA, which we have a bit new name, I think, for it, but it's Canada, US, and Mexico. So they might have some data that kind of nobody else has about relationship within the 3 countries. Same like European Union obviously has its own central bank. So central bank is one for the entire European Union. However, every country has also a former central bank that also has some data. And there are some other regional organizations that provide some data, like OECD, sort of organization of developed countries. So it's kind of unite rich countries with an idea to help poor countries, but not that famous and not that well working compared to World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So let's start with the 3 major ones. The 3 major one is IMF, which we start our journey with International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and World Economic Forum. So let's start with IMF. Once again, in macro, it makes a bit more sense to learn about history, what is IMF, and kind of see its role in the financial industry. But for us, on the micro level, we only need to understand basically how we can use it for our purposes. So IMF is all about financial system. The goal of IMF is to maintain international financial stability. Out of all organizations, probably has the worst reputation because it didn't achieve a lot. It created a lot of problems, even though they tried to do good. And partly, unlike other organizations, including its sort of a brother World Bank, IMF, this goal of financial stability is very narrow first, and second, they usually called when everything is already bad. And it's very hard to fix at that point. So it's not, of course, that they're evil or something like this, even though there are some problems with how it's governed and power dynamics. But mostly their programs rarely work, and they put countries in hard conditions. At the same time, they're also needed. And again, to be fair, they come when it's already too late. So it's like fire is already all over the place, and they have to put down the fire. So probably no matter what they do, it's hard to do something. So questionable. However, the track record, so the most they've got involved in the crisis times with Greece, Argentina, and Egypt, Ukraine countries. In all of those countries, they didn't really help to put on a great long-term financial stability. They are very short-term minded. That's another problem. They see the fire, they give money. So what they do, in simple terms, they give money not to the country, not to the business, not to invest. They only give money to central banks with the idea to maintain financial stability or exchange rate. And it was founded, as I mentioned, it has a brother, World Bank, because both of them were founded in Bretton Woods conference, which you're supposed to know from macroeconomics. If you haven't taken macro, you will learn about it. After Second World War, kind of 1944, so technically still during the Second World War, there was a major financial conference in the United States, in Bretton Woods, where the international financial system was designed. And later on, with the foundation of United Nations after Second World War, part of that design entered United Nations. So under United Nations, we have different organizations, and two of them are economic organizations. One is International Monetary Fund, and another one is World Bank. So they're brothers, because they're both under United Nations. They also means they are both government funded, mostly by wealthy developed countries. However, every country contributes a little bit. And their goals are different. So International Monetary Fund is concerned with financial stability. And because it was founded after Second World War, financial stability was mostly about exchange rate, maintaining effective exchange rate. Now that collapsed many times. So with time, as we have market exchange rate, the role of the organization has shifted and changed to still supporting exchange rates, but kind of through a market way and helping those central banks to operate the way American and European central banks operate, basically. So yeah, that's monetary fund for us. So that's what they do, but that has nothing or little to do with us and kind of, people or entrepreneurs or business people. For us, what's important is data. So you go straight to IMF data, and because their goal is financial stability, they're really good in explaining global economic stability. So their key report is called World Economic Outlook. And out of all documents, this is probably the most impactful. And it's kind of a paradox because, so IMF is, where is IMF? I think in US. So one of them in US, another one is in Europe. I think IMF is in DC. But nevertheless, they are, located in one place. They don't know the world very well. And coming from another country, I can know for sure their outlook is wrong about 80% of time. But it's still the most impactful document because remember what Keynes said, reality is not that important as a perception of reality because it's all about future, and the World Economic Outlook is about future. So it doesn't matter what the real future will be. It matters what powerful people around the world think future will be. And World Economic Outlook is the most powerful document. It's the document that all the leaders of countries and large companies read twice a year. It's published, and it is forecast of IMF about the future of the world. Short term, half year, 1 year, but usually 1-2 years top. But they define what is important, what region of the world is problematic, what's happening, things like this. So I encourage you, of course, it's a little too much for, introductory course, but the way our study structure, you might never have another microeconomic class. So it's important to learn in this class where you can learn more, basically. So this one is really good. You can see the last one, April, and we see the war, of course, in Ukraine caused a major disruption. Before, it was quite largely about pandemic. Still, even before the war, we see disrupted recovery and high inflation from January. And before that, we're a bit more optimistic in 2021 about recovery. So you look there, you see the numbers, what they forecast, what's going to happen in global economy. The other report is about financial stability, global financial stability. It is a bit more specific. So if you work in finance, mostly banking, so finance is kind of different. It's divided between two worlds. One world is investment, Wall Street, stocks, and other things. And the other world is banking. And even in this level, you need to know those are completely different things. And in fact, legally, they're not allowed to be the same because they have different goals. Investments, making money. Banking, preserving money. Very different goal, very often opposite goal, because to make money, you need to take risk. To preserve money, you need not to take risk. That's why they are legally not allowed to be in one room, basically, because you will take money, it will take risk, and it will end up very badly for clients. So banking is very different. Banking is preserving capital. That's why you put money in a bank to save money. You go to Wall Street to make money. Different worlds. So IMF is all about banking. It's almost never writes anything about stocks and things like that. It's not their world. Their world is stability and banking, global banking. What's happening with currencies, what's happening with interest rates, and how stable is our world of banks. So it's quite specific, but quite interesting as well. And there are also database with just data statistics, which not that compared to other sources that we have, especially World Bank, it's not kind of that good. However, if you work in a banking sector or you're interested in banking, that's a source to find very specific things that you might not find anywhere elsewhere. But this World Economic Outlook, important to know. I again encourage you to read. It's interesting what the world is about. Now, moving on, we'll go to its brother World Bank. World Bank is, even though it's kind of like a brother, it has almost opposite reputation. And it's really good. And everybody loves World Bank worldwide. I don't know if I ever heard of anything bad about World Bank, which is, very similar because they quite often they even work on the same programs. Like in Greece, they did have the same, they came together to finance Greece when Greece was in trouble. However, their goals are different and their approach is different and their management system is also very different. IMF is very demanding and it never gives money to people. It only gives money to a central bank and usually in exchange for things that people don't like, for unpopular reforms like balancing budget, which means firing people who work for governments and reducing pensions. So why it's so unpopular? Because number one demand of IMF is to reduce pensions. Not very popular, and also firing. So many countries have too many people working for the government. It's a common problem in many, many countries around the world. So IMF estimates that how you estimate too many, right? How much is enough, how much not. Budget. If you don't have money to pay those people without taking debt, that's too many. It's not that, you have 10 people doing the same job. No, too many just from budgeting perspective, too many. So they came to Greece and they says, you need to fire, 1 million people that works for government in the middle of the crisis where unemployment is already 20%. So that's why, and it wasn't very reasonable from macro perspective, from like strategic perspective, but they are bankers and they act like bankers. And bankers say, well, you don't have money, you kind of cut cost, the easiest to cut cost to fire people. and that's IMF. So World Bank, completely different mindset. World Bank was designed, and by the way, even in 1944, when the ideas came, IMF was an American idea proposed by America. World Bank, in a different form, actually was proposed by John Maynard Keynes, who was representing the United Kingdom. And that's why there are two organizations, because they couldn't agree on one organization doing everything. And they have disagreements, and World Bank goal is to promote development in countries that are less developed. And so after Second World War, because of massive destruction and reasons of the war, people or our leaders realized that the only way we can prevent World War III is if like more successful countries will help less successful countries to achieve success. Because if you have country where people have nothing to eat, basically nothing to wear, if they have nothing, they will go to war. And that happened before Second World War all the time. And partly why Russia attacked as well, because even though Russia as a country on a macro level has a lot of money, people in Russia don't have a lot of money, nothing to lose, so they don't mind basically, losing everything, all this international pressure, all those things that from Western perspective seems that they're losing something. Well, most people don't have anything, so they're not losing. They don't go on vacations, they don't have any income, they cannot afford anything to buy, and they're brainwashed, a lot of people. So that was a fear all the way in 1945. So World Bank was designed to, in a bit like a charity organization, but with very, very strategic mindset and very intelligent people. So World Bank, through its life from 1945 until today, hired almost always the best economists. And if we can, pinpoint who progress economics as a science or contributed to progress of economics as a science, World Bank did most of it. More than universities, any particular university. Of course, combined universities produce way more knowledge, but any particular university, well, let's say like group of universities, some of them are united, like Ivy League schools, for example, not close to World Bank, because World Bank has a lot of data, has a lot of money to conduct research, economic research, which is important. They talk to people. They go to Rwanda and they talk to people in Rwanda. They collect all the data and figure out what is the problem, what you want to make Rwanda better. People in Harvard cannot do that. It's maybe one person can go to Rwanda, as a part of some experiment, but it's very unusual. World Bank can have an office in Rwanda and does have an office there. 365 days a year they are working there, and they have offices in about 180 countries around the world. Offices, or they have designated partners. So they have a company, they quite often contract companies to collect data for them and pay for that. So World Bank, not only as an organization, actually contributed to progress of economics as a science by collecting data and trying what's successful, what not. And a lot of major things we learned came from World Bank about economics and about data analysis too. So it's, today we have computers, we know everything. The way we got to know that everything is more largely to World Bank, because they were the first to figure out, okay, they have limited budget, even though they're quite powerful and quite wealthy, still limited compared to their goal. Their goal, can you imagine, to make everyone around the world prosperous. It's an ambitious goal, and it also has layers. So layer number one was hunger. So if we look at before Second World War, so that's the data that people in 1944 operate when they were making decisions. We had about 2/3 of the world population having problems with food. 2/3 of the world. Not sometimes not very regularly, but more often than not. That's incredible numbers. And that, of course, kind of justifies the war, or not justifies, but explains why so many people and so many wars were happening. Because if people have nothing to eat and they're going to basically die, and then there is some crazy leader that says, let's go somewhere and take someone else's stuff, it more or less resonates. If people have something, to eat and to wear and where to live, they're not motivated to go actually anyway, and to listen to any crazy people too. So 2/3, that's where the World Bank picked up. Before pandemic, actually even before 2008, so I think around 2000, 2005, World Bank achieved a place where almost nowhere in the world there was what's called a systemic hunger. Systemic hunger, which means people have nothing to eat, or a significant part of population in a particular region constantly has nothing to eat. So from 2/3 of the world to pretty much zero, with some exception, remote locations, indigenous people around the world, there are problems. And there are also countries where it's not systemic, but quite often. So what happens where, if we look right now, there are millions of people have nothing to eat, but that's not systemic. So not systemic means it's not basically a system. It's caused by disruption, which are either natural disaster or wars. So we have millions of people still have nothing to eat, but not because it's like normal situation for them. Normal situation of kids dying because of hunger, which was very common before. World Bank, through decades of work and planned and intelligent work, long-term commitment, not just giving food, that's very important. So we're very interesting project, how they operate. They usually have a plan for 30-year plan. And it's not, they almost never give food because they don't have enough money to give food to everybody. They start with finding smartest people in the country and educating them about the problem and the solution. And they give them scholarship to go to US, Europe, to see around the world, to see what's possible, and then go back. And then they finance some project, they finance local business, and so on. And it takes forever. And that's one of the things which maybe was controversial at some point, because, well, there is a fire, there are people nothing to eat, maybe you should give them food and spend your resources there. But they realize that it's not solving the problem. There is not enough, at least in the World Bank, not enough to feed everybody. If we just give enough food, it's not solving anything. If you make change, and it takes 30 years, but it actually changed the entire way things are going around in each country. So it's not some artificial, oh, we give money today and then we don't give money tomorrow and everything back to square one. No, because they created layers after layers. They created people, educated people that know the problem and how to solve it. Then they created some infrastructure local that is capable of constantly solving problems and on and on and on. So remarkable achievements, but of course problems are still there, and it's just one organization. They can't do anything, but they also can understand what they're working with. First, the poorest of the poorest in the world. So if you look on their database and their reports, a lot of them are about really kind of worst places on this planet for humans. And they try to help for those places. So some projects are very, very, unique and specific. Then there are topics. So topics, world hunger, which means mostly agriculture. So how you solve problems with hunger, not by giving food, but by creating a system of local food production that is resistant to climate change. So one of the biggest, probably the biggest issue is climate change right now for the World Bank. So how climate change will have an impact on the, again, hunger, because they almost solve hunger, but now the outlook is not that great, because there are locations around the world, and especially in Asia, where there are a lot of people, and in Africa too, in Nigeria, I know the problem. So there are many places with growing population, but declining agricultural land because of climate change. And that's agricultural land actually declines everywhere, including the United States. That's a big problem. But in US, we have all production of food. So even if with that decline, we still have enough food we export a lot of agriculture. So as you saw, it might not be the best quality, but we do have more than enough. Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria have a serious medium term, even like 5-10 years. We are talking about dozens of millions of people have nothing to eat. So it's very hard to actually solve, because there is no land, and land is drying out because of the heating temperature. So it's hot. If you know a little bit of geography, those places are very hot already without climate change, and now add a couple of degrees and all the turmoil with climate change, and it's a real issue. They have no food and no water to produce food. So serious issue. So we might have actually, and that's part of what they're working on. We might have decline in this percentage of people who have food around the world. So there will be again increase of people who don't have food and who have systemic hunger. So that's concern with climate change. So they try to again mitigate, find solutions to that. That's probably number one. Number two is participation of women in the labor force and sort of education. So it's a social change. So one of the major discoveries early on, when they kind of start their work, they learned that many places are so poor because they live like that. Basically, it's a closed system. So if you have actually any country, if it's closed, it's a closed system. So when they went to like many African countries and Asian countries had that problem with just the lifestyle, where children start working at the age of like 9 and they never get any education, and women never get any education. Some men get some education, but most kids never get education, and 100% of women never get education. With that, there is just no way to, we have some success in Western countries, right? So we try to bring that success to where there's hunger and not success. So there is no way without education do that. Like, we don't know the way. Maybe there is a way, but we don't know it. So we know that if kids go to school, and better even to university, but we are talking, 9-year-old kids, that's the end of they barely can read. Actually, they couldn't even read before. So there is no future for that system. And at least we don't know how to solve that with how to solve hunger in that system. We don't know. Maybe one of you can come up with, but what we know, kids should get education. Then come up and bring, even because if you don't have educated people, you cannot even adopt a technology, right? Because, okay, there is a solution. Let's say Netherlands come up with a great technical solution, how to make land that is maybe not very productive, how to make it productive. You can build, greenhouses, for example, and solar panels, and everything's cool. Who's gonna do that if you have kids that cannot read? Like, there is such a gap that it's impossible to adopt a technology from. So to even to accept help, like a productive help, impossible. So education is sort of, I would say it was number one before climate change, obviously. Right now, with education, they again, a great success. Many countries, millions of people went to school because of World Bank. And again, they're not that powerful, but what they do is showing how to do things. And setting up schools in India, setting up schools in Mexico, just let's set up one school. Let's show how good is for parents and society that never went to school, how good the schools are. And that's acceptable, and that's socially acceptable. And there was, of course, resistance, not easy. Some, I remember one member of World Bank was making a presentation that they had to pay parents to let their kids go to school because they had zero value of school. They thought school is a waste of time completely, because kid can help, grow food. And school is something like reading. What's the value of reading? Reading won't give you bananas. So that's the society. And then with time, kids went to school, they got education, they can read, they learned, they brought some technology, they improve life. That helps. But the beginning was pretty tough. So World Bank has tons and tons of reports on those things. And if we go to Data World Bank, so Data World Bank is the largest database of economic information in the world, because they have everything that National Statistic has, they copy it, but they also have their own. And you can see indicators, and you can see agriculture development, you got aid, healthcare, climate change, very specific things. So some of them are general, but there are a lot of very specific things. So obviously, GDP, things like this, they collect from statistics. How literacy rate adult female, age 15 and above, statistic in many countries don't care about that. So they do not collect. So if government does not collect the data, World Bank has to collect it. And there are still gaps, if you click here, for example, and you try to look, so all the countries here, you can see different years. You see American Samoa, the last time they did 1980, you got Angola 14. So there are problems. There are Bahamas, no data at all. Even Austria, well, Austria, they accept it sort of at 100%, right? So everyone can read, so they do not really collect the data. So this, every indicator makes sense for some countries. So, probably everyone in Australia can read, unless something happened. So it's not such an important indicator as, for example, to Angola, where it was a problem. So you can track that indicator for countries that make sense. And quite a few for energy, where we got climate change on this. So for climate change, a lot of freshwater withdrawals, forestry, irrigated land. So that's the land that's decreasing. So agricultural land that is used for agriculture is used. If you choose to watch, I think was the Netflix movie about climate change, there you saw the data. And in food production movie, they were also mentioned. So it's a big problem. We have land decreasing because not sustainable agriculture practice. And yeah, so data's here. That's something for unemployment, male, female difference. So also quite popular in pandemic world to track those indicators separately, because we saw more women got unemployed than men, and more women stay unemployed longer than men. And that has to do with children, of course, not going to school and being homeschooled. So that's something to track about. And yeah, so that is it. External debt. So many different data. So if you ever need something, you know where to find it. World Bank. And finally, we have, I go here quite a lot, but no, it's somewhere. So we have World Economic Forum. That is actually my favorite organization because they are different and they publish a lot of really cool high-tech reports. So World Economic Forum is unique because it's not government. So there are problems, and it's very nice to have this organization to compare to World Bank, for example, or IMF. So World Bank and IMF gets its money from US government, German government, British government, Japanese government, which means they will never ever say anything bad about US government or how certain policy in certain country is not good policy, or certain political views are bad, things like this. So they also, especially IMF, have a lot of kind of attacks on it, which are quite reasonable attacks, that they utilize their policies to project power of United States, for example, in particular, to the world. And in Europe, with Greece, was very clear that IMF was working for Germany, and it has nothing in their mind to help Greek people. And that, again, we can argue about this. It's not one-sided, but there were a lot of things and evidence pointing out that direction, which is not great. And so, government always has its own, it's about power quite often. World Economic Forum is a non-government institution. It is funded by 1,000 largest corporations of the world. So it gives them a lot of freedom. They are free to tell, this is bad policy. This president is not doing good, and that country is not doing good. They rarely do that because they still talk, but they're not that obligated by their finance. So they're financed by private business. So they're not, they don't really care about policies. And mostly it's good because they don't have to say that, United States and Germany as their largest contributors for, let's say, to IMF and France, right? They don't have to always say that those countries doing the best things they can. And goal of World Economic Forum is somewhat similar to World Bank, but the approach is very different. So while World Bank, well, again, World Bank is way more powerful. We need to understand it's an extremely powerful organization with a lot of capital, which is pretty much forever, right? They're given capital, it's forever. They also have a long history, and they don't really, they can do what they want. So in times and with a lot of money. So they have also political power behind him. So the representative can go to a president of Kenya, for example, and negotiate certain agreements and things like this. World Economic Forum, being private, effectively organization, cannot do a lot of those things. But it's not their approach as well. Their approach is purely technological. So they also want to help other countries to develop, but they see that in a different way. Not the government, they don't really, they acknowledge local governments quite a lot, and you can actually see in the reports they make, almost all of their projects have local governments involved. So state, not even state, but city council, mayors, because a lot of those are technology acceptance. So how they work, what's the idea of World Bank? They track all the innovation around the world, and they see, hey, in that place, that company, on that university, on that lab, designed that thing. That thing could be very useful in different other places around the world. And they compile those reports and they send to the top 1,000 companies first, and then they publish them online for free and we can read it. So it's way more fun to read World Economic Forum reports than like IMF or World Bank, because those are about problems and about how everything is better. They try to make it a little bit better. World Economic Forum is pretty much 30 years ahead in its report. So it says, look, that's what's possible. There is this lab, it already has some kind of biorobot that can do this. Imagine what it could do to, I don't know, problem with climate change in Bangladesh. That's it's a lot of kind of fantasies, right? It's a lot of optimism and not always works, but it actually works quite often. And for example, Bill Gates with his initiative with fighting, I forgot what disease, came exactly from World Economic Forum. He is the one that actually reads those reports. And he got a report and see, there is this disease. It kills like thousands of kids in Africa, but we have a cure from this disease in the West. So it's kind of got to his heart that there is a place in the world where thousands of people, was actually number one cause of child mortality was that disease, while it's eradicated from most of the world. So he read the report, he figured out, well, we can help those people, and he dedicated, I think, already more than a decade to actually solving that problem, and he did. So it's quite interesting. And another part was about nuclear energy, different innovations there also came from here. So lots of report. If we go here, we have the topics. So you can see completely different topics: artificial intelligence, climate change is similar, cybersecurity, education skills. One of the things that I encourage you to read here is actually a report of future jobs. I think with pandemic, they didn't do a lot of things what they normally do as kind of everybody, but they have a report what jobs will be in like 25-year period, I think 20, 50 year from now. They ask, because they're funded by the largest corporation and they're kind of managed by all those corporations or CEOs of those. So they have access. They can go to Bill Gates, they can go to Elon Musk and ask, what do you think, what type of people Tesla will need 10 years from now? And they will collect from everybody the data and they put together and see, hey, that's what's needed. Maybe it's surprising, maybe it's not that surprising, but it's very interesting for you as you're in college to learn what's needed, because I can tell you, quick summary, top 30, it's all about kind of computer skills, basically, and communication skills too. And mostly, number one message is that the job you will have in 20 years does not exist today. So what you need is to learn how to learn. So you can get a job that doesn't exist, and you'll probably have 3 to 5 completely different jobs in your lifetime, which is very different from, let's say, your parents and your grandparents. Your grandparents, like you're born, you're like 18 years old, you went to coal mine and you retired from that coal mine. That is not the world today. Not only you switch companies, but have the same job. No, you will have completely different jobs, 3 to 5 over lifetime, which means you will have to study all over again, basically. But that's what forecasted. And it's quite interesting to read those reports on what are the skills that needs. And you can see, great example, just looking here, Indian teachers finding a way to keep pupils learning, things like this. That's how it works. So it brings, there is somewhere in India, some teacher did something really cool that could be useful for the rest of the world, and on and on and on. So it has a lot of different topics. It has, blockchain, cities, amortization. Everything is extremely futuristic, which I really like personally. So I encourage you to subscribe to its like news feed. I receive every day some kind of news about what's there, and you can read their reports by topics. So here you can find all the innovation pretty much possible on the topic, if that topic is somehow has a public benefit, right? So the goal of World Economic Forum is similar. It's global development, and is to help with the problems that the world is facing. So it's not to make money. It's to actually solve the same problem as World Bank is trying to solve, but through technology and through the mindset that the problem that is today cannot be solved with technology of today, and it wasn't be able to solve before, but that's fine, because we will have new technology, and that new technology and new way of thinking, if applied to that old problem, that could work. And it's not universal, of course. There are problems there too. So that forum, you might heard, again, if you follow economic news, World Economic Forum actually has a forum in Davos in Switzerland every year. Most powerful people gather and talk to each other. It was just a couple of weeks ago. And so when they gather, they always talk about climate change and things, and nothing happens. They talk, 10 years, nothing happens. So there is a little bit of that, right? They gather, they talk, they say all the right things. What's her name? Greta Thunberg was the girl, the climate activist was there, I think, 5 years ago. Everyone was like, yeah, she's great, she's so right. Nothing happens. So, it's not easy, not perfect. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Not easy, not perfect, but that is still useful. And from technological innovation part, it is extremely useful. So let's look. You can see, a lot of things. And by the way, how life changed during pandemic, a lot of those things as well. Online work, what type of jobs, and things like this. So look. Oh yeah, I was here. Cities. Oh, they changed the website too. But it's pretty cool. Also, the reports are extremely kind of cool and innovative. So you can learn also the design technique, which I encourage you to do that as well. So you can see how it all works. You can click here, it's live. And infographics, things like this. Everything is very modern and very nice. And yeah, so we're gonna stop here. I encourage you to kind of find at least one interesting thing on each website, on each database, and share it with, or kind of remember it, and I'm going to ask you in homework and maybe an exam. That's going to be it.